Today. Okay, thank you for that. So, a very good afternoon to all of you who have taken time to join us today from different parts of the world. So, it is indeed my pleasure to warmly welcome you all to today's special lecture organized by Sarojini Naidu Centre for Women's Studies, Jamia Millia Islamia. I extend my welcome to our distinguished speaker, our faculty members, our students, participants who are with us. And I would like to begin by expressing our sincere gratitude to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Masar Asif, our Honorable Registrar, Professor Mehtab Alam Rizvi, the University Administration for their continued support to the activities that Sarojini Naidu Centre for Women's Studies, has been able to, undertake. So I would also like to acknowledge and thank our Honorary Director, Professor Nishad Zaidi, whose guidance and encouragement has made all these events in our center possible. And today's lecture is titled Practices, Livelihoods, Agriculture, Taste, and Ecology, South Atlantic Women's Food Heritage and Food Security. And we're indeed delighted to have Dr. Paola Vargas Arana from University of Manchester with us. And I would like to now call upon our director, Professor Nishad Zaidi, for a welcome address to this special lecture and also to formally introduce the speaker for the day. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Amina. Thank you so much. Paola, I'm so glad that, we are able to meet again virtually, and I'm really looking forward to listening to you. Dr. Paola Vargas Arana, dear friends, is as you will notice, when she starts her lecture, she is a scholar in true sense, in the sense that Paola is very passionate, and that passion you will see, when she begins her conversation, when she begins her presentation. Paola, this week is special because this week we are celebrating International Women's Day. So it is double pleasure that we have you, and I'm able to welcome you on this virtual platform during our 1 week celebration of International Women's Day. To introduce Paola, Paola's research bridges anthropology and early modern history to examine the reconfiguration of African knowledge in the Americas, with particular attention to maroon communities and the roles of African women. Combining ethnographic and archival methods, she eliminates the historical roots of contemporary cultural expressions, especially in food systems, and the challenges facing African descended population. Currently a research associate on inequality and crisis in West African economic thinking project at the University of Manchester, Paola has held a Newton International Fellowship at King's College London and a fellowship at University of Edinburgh. Her first monograph, African Memories, Food Waste and Freedom in Colonial Colombia Gold Mines, is forthcoming this year with Liverpool University Press. Looking forward to reading your monograph, Paola, which sounds absolutely fascinating. So excited to have you. Now, I won't stand between you and your audience. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, first Professor Nishad Zaidi, for this invitation. It's, as you said, it's a great pleasure to see you again, although this time virtually. And I would also like to thank to the, I don't know if I'm pronouncing well, Sarojini Naidu Centre. And for having me here. It's really an honor. It's really an honor, and this is my first time to speak to an Indian audience in India, and this is very significant to me because I really admire many scholars, including Professor Nishad's work. So I'm very happy to be here and to bring you news of the other sides of the world that perhaps you don't know so much, especially from a gender perspective. So I'm going to share my screen. Are you seeing it now? Hello?
Yes. Yes, we can see
you. Yes?
Yes,
Okay,
Paola,
I
your
think
screen is here. Right.
yes, it's all right. It's all
Yeah,
right.
perfect,
Okay,
perfect.
so thank you again, and thank you to all the organizers for having me here. My presentation is called Practices, Livelihoods, Agriculture, Taste and Ecology, South Atlantic, Women's Food Heritage and Food Security. Here we have a picture of my dear friends, Rosaria Vasconcelos, rest in peace, and Evisa in Minas. And this is an elevated garden that I'm going to speak about. It contains both medicinal and seasoning plants that are truly very important for Afro-descendant populations. And so let me just start right away. This is not moving. Okay. This presentation draws on my historical and comparative work on a women's-led heritage system that links West Africa and Afro-Colombian territories through a set of coherent agricultural, culinary, and ecological principles. Studying it helps us clarify a major gap in current food security debates, namely the unexamined material relation between food heritage and nutrition security. During recent decades, food policy had largely prioritized youth-centered agro-technological solutions, yet food insecurity remains above 2015 levels. This remains a contested terrain. Dominant agro-food models still privilege productivity growth, monoculture, sterile input, and corporate concentration, despite evidence that this model intensified ecological degradation and makes food access more vulnerable to climate and supply chain shocks, as seen during COVID-19 or the war in Ukraine. So this picture look at it's evident on how the soil is degraded with any kind of agriculture, in fact. So we need to take care and attention on how we do agriculture, and monocultivation of hundreds of thousands of hectares can only progress on the desertification of the planet. But this has been like mainly the solution that these mega corporations and politicians have prioritized until present. Critical scholarship, I'm sorry, I think critical scholarship has challenged this dominance by pressing nutrition, agency, rights, and sustainability more firmly onto the agenda. As part of this, the 2025 Lancet Commission argues that current food systems are the single most influential driver of transgression across key planetary limits. It shows that food systems contribute about 30% of global greenhouse emissions, while also driving land ecosystem change, biodiversity loss, and severe disruptions linked to fertilizer use, especially nitrogen and phosphorus. This matters because it establishes that the dominant way of producing, distributing, and consuming food is itself the source of ecological crisis, not a solution to be refined, but a system to be rethought. The Commission also insists that sustainable diets must be culturally appropriate. The consequences of this system are starkly legible in two territories at the center of this research. In the Gambia, one of the Upper Guinea countries in West Africa, domestic rice production meets only 17% of demand, while 83% imported primarily from India create a dependency that structurally erodes the agroecological base that Mandinka women has historically maintained. Fruit and vegetable consumption in that country stands at 68 grams per day against a recommended 400. Iron deficiency affects 27% of the population, and obesity has risen from 2.8 to 10.7%. A nutritional transition driven not by abundance, but by import dependency and market restructuring. In the meantime, in Colombia, following the 2012 free trade agreement with the US, the imports from this country reached 2 million tons of yellow maize and 136,000 tons of white maize by 2018, whilst the large supermarket chains displaced small local vendors. 42% of Afro-Colombian people face food insecurity. Before the free trade agreement, Colombia produced all the maize it needs. This is to clarify. These figures are not background statistics. They are the context in which the women in this research garden, cook, and transmit their knowledge, and against which their strategies must be understood. By examining how South Atlantic women culinary organizations sustain diversity through historically grounded food knowledge, that policy has largely sidelined, my work engaged directly with this critical scholarship and extended by showing how food heritage contributes materially to nutrition security. Feminist political ecology provides a theoretical foundation for this claim. As Rochelet, Thomas Lyer, Wangari, and others have established, feminist political ecology treats gender as a critical variable in shaping resource access and control, interacting with class, race, caste, culture, and ethnicity to shape processes of ecological change. In food system context, this framework reveals how EU-centered development reflect masculine Western industrialized ontologies that systematically devalue women's subsistence work and oral knowledge transmission and nutritional decision-making. Applied here, it does something more. It reveals a women-led food system spanning South Atlantic as a case of gender ecological resistance, not merely a reaction against oppression, but as an active creation and maintenance of food systems sustained under successive waves of intersecting ecological, gender, and political disruptions. This is a phenomenon my historically and contemporary research seeks to understand. The historical depth of this finding is crucial. My archival work in colonial Colombia showed that many of the enslaved Africans taken to the goldfields of Antioquia, an interior province in Colombia, came from the upper Guinea coast, now the Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, Guinea-Conakry, and Sierra Leone. African and Afro-Colombian women's agencies sustain connected culinary, sensory, and botanical practices shaped by centuries of forced Atlantic movement of people, crops, and knowledge. Today, women in both sides of the Atlantic maintain intergenerational practices, sustaining dietary diversity through embodied nutritional understanding, sensory and botanical knowledge in which tastes, functions as memory and active refusal of imposed diets. So here we have, are you listening okay? Could you confirm just to?
Yes, absolutely fine, perfect.
Okay, great. So in this map, I was wishing to show you this geography, which I think it's really important. So the people from this area of these countries that I named came to specific coal mines in Inner Colombia, that it's basically in that top north of South America. And it's also interesting that if you see there's a parallel in the equatorial line of these two areas in which it was possible for them to incorporate, to adapt the crops from the other side of the Atlantic. These are tropical environments that in which seasons are very could be comparable, like a rainy season and also a dry season. So it's something that they took advantage of in the midst of all this oppression of the slave trade. These practices have been constantly reworked amid gendered land dispossession and agro-technological policies, as well as enslavement and all these deep violence that enslavement brought into women, especially African women, who were, as we know, constantly raped and forced to reproduce the enslaved labor in these mines and throughout the Americas. This makes heritage a process rather than a static tradition in which amidst all these changes, they have been adapting, reconfiguring, rethinking how to produce their own food and reproduce their own traditions. Food practices are organized through a coherent agrarian and ecological logic. This South Atlantic women-led agri-food knowledge developed bi-directionally alongside the forced migration of the slave trade. African staples such as plantain, yam, and rice. We know that plantain, of course, comes from most probably from India, but at the time of the slave trade, it was already a massive staple in the area. And then it moved westward with the waves of the slave trade, where cultivation and culinary logics were reconfigured by enslaved women in Colombia. Meanwhile, and this is very important, cassava, peanuts, and maize, among other several species, travel east, now anchoring West African gardens, cuisines, tastes, and livelihoods. Enslaved African women carried into the Americas form of ecological and culinary knowledge that they then actively adapted to new ecosystem conditions, selecting, experimenting, and recombining in ways that were neither random nor passive. At the same time, the Atlantic system also transformed food practices in West Africa, not least through the incorporation of American crops into African settings, again, through women's deliberate integration into field and kitchen. What this shows is not static survival, but adaptive continuity, driven by women experts' decision making at every stage. It is precisely this continuity that food security policies has consistently failed to see. My first book shows how in Northwest Colombian goldfields, slaveholders dispatch ill-provisioned crews to very remote mines, a structural condition that catalyzed captives' agency to adapt ecologically attuned food systems for the new Colombian environment. Women led this practice, cross-culturally blending African staples with indigenous ones. This part is really important because they not only introduced all the types and knowledge of cultivation of rice, yam, etc., but they also integrated maize, beans, etc., into their own cultivation practices, learning them and in exchange with the indigenous populations, most probably women too. Okay, this cross-referencing Atlantic sources confirmed that Upper Guinea women strategies were far from improvised. They drew on long-standing food systems where for millennia, women led the domestication of rice varieties, plantain, yam, and herbs, creating unique food systems. This was not simply a division of labor. It constituted a domain of female epistemic authority over seed selection, soil knowledge, and the nutritional logic of combining crop. That was socially recognized and intergenerationally transmitted through women's networks. Upper Guinea agriculture was historically based on subsistence and crop diversity. Mandinka food systems were highly gendered, with rice cultivation a domain largely entrusted to women. Although both women and men participated, scholars have long documented women's leading role in sowing, weeding, transplanting, and harvesting, while men focused on demanding physical tasks, field preparation, and maintenance. These would like to highlight two research on here, which is first Judith Carney and then Walter Hawthorne. These are the ones that have specifically documented not only these practices on agriculture, but how that led to societies that were governed by women. Women had a big authority because they determine what and how do people eat and how do people crop, and that was the main dedication of the society of the time. Throughout this West African region, however, the provisioning demands of slave trade vessels drove a shift toward monocultures, particularly of rice, millet, and sorghum that could withstand the vessels' Atlantic crossing. Slave traders introduced and promoted, so here is important to do a clarification. As you can imagine, these vessels needed to travel the Atlantic full of food because they were carrying through the Middle Passage all these enslaved populations. As that became so massive, as we know, there were about 12 million people that crossed the Atlantic during the slave trade. What happened is that they needed a massive production of food supplies that could sustain that travel during that period. That was an very strong impact into the way societies worked, African societies worked before the slave trade. So slave traders introduced and promoted Asian rice, or Oryza sativa, over the locally domesticated Oryza glaberrima. Glaberrima is a different rice species than the Asian one, which has been ever domesticated by human beings. So we only have, as you can see here in the map on the bottom, we only have as humanity, two varieties that have provenly been domesticated by humanity. One in this area of Africa that you see in the map at the right, and the other is the Asian one that you perfectly know. Glaberrima was cultivated, Glaberrima is the African one, Glaberrima was cultivated in West Africa for more than 3,000 years and was intrinsically linked to women's political and spiritual authority over seeds, land, and grain. Glaberrima also requires less water to grow than sativa, but it could only be milled by hand with a mortar and pestle, which was women's work. The Asian variety sativa instead requires greater water requirements and the need for demanding physical tasks of intensive land clearance, desalinization, and iron tool production. It produces more yields and can be milled mechanically, which is why the slave traders needed to produce this kind of rice to fill out the vessels of food for the Middle Passage. Because of this, the Asian rice variety demanded more of the tasks performed by men. As women leading roles in the subsistence economy and in maintaining crop diversity diminished, more women were sent to the Americas because they were seen as less essential to food production. Insecurity from slave raidings, combined with demographic growth from higher sativa yields, further intensify male control over land, labor, and marriage throughout the centuries of the slave trade. The colonial period added commercial pressures from groundnut and cotton exports, narrowing crop diversity and reinforcing the stricter, more hierarchical gender divisions that increasingly confined women to a domestic sphere. What had been a flexible system of gender division of responsibility became a rigid, segregating regime. So it's interesting to notice that all these changes, and especially for the Indian setting for a comparison, that all these changes already took place before the colonization of Africa. So in the case of Africa, the disruption of European powers came much earlier, and it has been very little understand until today how much it impacted the slave trade into the governance systems that intrinsically Africa had created before the slave trade. These cumulative changes not only transformed gender relations, but triggered environmental degradation that undermined regional ecosystem resilience. Centuries of slave trade and colonization also brought American crops, maize, peanut, manioc, tomatoes, and others to West Africa via European traders and later returnees from the Americas. In response to external demands and the masculinization of agrarian authority, West African women experimented with and integrated these crops into field and kitchen strategies. Neither in West Africa nor at arrival in Colombia these women passively accepted the conditions imposed over them. They countered the dispossession through running away, forming Maroon communities, refusing to work in colonizers' plots, and creating adaptive ways of cultivation and dietary diversity that included both African and American crops. What they viewed in this process is what their descendants still tend today. So we can see, as I said from the beginning, these are the elevated gardens, which is a technology that is super rich, and it's generally imported by displaced population contemporarily to cities. So that also makes cities more greener and allow a bit of the self-sustainability of food that these women that, of course, as I was explaining at the start, they live racism, discrimination, ethnic discrimination. So when they arrive to the cities, the possibility of having these very small garden of plot of gardens can allow them to produce some of this food and even sell some supplies. Rice often provides the base of the meal, while yam and other root crops remain central to soup and composite dishes. Plantain leaves structure techniques of wrapping and boiling that bring multiple ingredients into relation within a single preparation. So here we have an example. I brought you an example from the Gambia and one from Colombia on this food system that I'm claiming that exists. And here you see on the left how the olele in the Gambia is prepared and how is the pastel chocuano in Colombia. So both preparations, as you can see, are steamed in plantain leaves, and they are both based on grains such as rice, especially rice, but also beans. It's a very complete and nutritional dish that has also several other vegetables inside, and it has less cost than any other because you steam like a lot of them at the same time using the same fire. So it's something that reduces the costs for these women. Let me see where it was. Women organize these food practices through culturally specific principles. I think that small individual and collective gardens. So as we can see also one of these gardens in the bottom in this kind with the spring onions. Near the household where herbs are cultivated both for medicinal and seasoning form part of both sides of the South Atlantic. This shows that there is a unique, coherent food heritage system that women have maintained across centuries of forced separation. Well, we already talked about this. My recent fieldwork in Antioquia, conducted in 2025, showed this heritage system operating under the most acute. Oh, I'm sorry. And as you can see, I'm reaching to the conclusions. My recent fieldwork in Antioquia, conducted in 2025, shows this heritage system operating under the most acute contemporary pressures. Colombia has more than 7 million internally displaced people, the highest figure in the world for a country not formally at war, with Afro-Colombian and indigenous women disproportionately affected. Those arriving in Medellin's steep peripheral hillsides encounter a city that has absorbed over 400,000 conflict victims by the end of 2023, mostly without tailored institutional support. I follow two initiatives led by displaced Afro-Colombian communities, both of which converted former dumping sites into functional agroecological spaces. In both cases, people arriving from the Pacific coast and rural Antioquia mobilized the same agroecological African matrix repertoire. I traced the same repertoire that I traced in colonial records. That is, intercropping, agroforestry principles, raised herb gardens, and culinary knowledge transmitted across generations. One initiative led entirely by women that you can see here is led by Lucia, that is on the right of the top picture, a woman that I really admire a lot. It was established on a rubble slope in 2012. Without any external support, the founding women which Rosa Isela, who is on the left of the top picture, was also one of the founders. Without an external support, the founding women cleared debris, sterilized soil beds with agricultural lime, established vegetable rows, intercropped fruit trees, and built a grassroots rehabilitation program supported approximately 50 young people recovering from addiction through gardening and cultivation workshops. This is very interesting because the workshops that they said to these, they were a lot of kids and teenagers in these areas that mainly they dedicated to drug consumption because they didn't have any other activity nor a possibility of education when they arrived. What you see on the back is like the new infrastructure that has been built, but at the beginning they were just living on plastics in the slopes of these lands. And obviously some schools have also been developed. So what they did was to use their agroecological knowledge to bring all these teenagers to help them with the garden and to learn on how to cultivate, how to produce food. They also did some workshops on cooking. So it's like they utilize their own knowledge for people that were struggling with drugs. A second initiative established an agroecological path through degraded river land, a cooperative restaurant serving heritage dishes, including the plantain rice preparation, whose technique I traced to 17th century colonial records. And they also have a raised garden besides the kitchen. Both are now designated pilot recognized communal gardens, and in 2024, development plan of Medellin City. However, the gender asymmetry in institutional recognitions tells a familiar story that feminist political ecology has documented across a context from Nepal to Sub-Saharan Africa. These women's initiatives have been repeatedly threatened by eviction, had its tool shed demolished by municipal police and police, and secured collective use rights only after more than 20 years of constructing the garden. The indigenous knowledge held by these Afro-Colombian women, oral, embodied, intergenerational, did not register as expertise in policy language that privileges written proposals and formal credentials that are associated mainly with agrotechnological interventions. This puts at risk the very strategies that could help humanity overcome food security and climate change issues, for example, with the herbal gardens in cities. Recent spatial modeling by Sangat and other colleagues from Colombia demonstrates that Afro-descendant collective territories in South America show 29 to 35% less annual tree cover loss than comparable non-Afro areas, harboring irrecoverable carbon stocks and extraordinary biodiversity. The connection between women agroecological knowledge and these environmental outcomes that this big research has documented is empirically now established. The failure to recognize it reduces the potential contributions that these displaced Afro-Colombian women could make to turn Colombian cities more sustainable and ecologically resilient. To conclude, at the center of this 5th-century food system stand women, as the original domesticators of African rice, as the architects of colonial maroon communities' survival, as the cross-cultural experimenters who blended African and American crops into what becomes Colombians and Upper Guinea's diet, and as agent of urban gardens who today convert rural slopes into agroecological spaces. These women did not merely transmit knowledge, they created it, selecting seeds, reading soils, composing dishes, naming herbs, decided what constituted proper nourishment, and passing all it forward through embodied practice intergenerational transmission from grandmothers, daughters, granddaughters, across generations, across oceans. Culture in this evidence is not context for food security. It is the infrastructure through which communities can operationalize their own strategies for food security in practice. The solution to their food insecurity is within themselves, not on top-down interventions that omit their knowledge. Feminist political ecology makes this visible because it refuses to separate ecological knowledge from the power relations that determine whose knowledge counts, whose labor is recognized, and whose food strategies receive institutional support. The question this evidence puts before us is not how to measure what these women have produced. The outputs are already there in the fields, in the pots, in the soil carbon data. The question is why food security framers continue to look past the women who produce them, and what changes are needed to change food security frames to follow a more democratic and gender responsible lens. Thank you so much for your attention. It's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Paola. That was fascinating, as expected. And Paola, you talked about how the knowledge that women preserve is so different from the neoliberal articulations of food and food security. Uh, interestingly, in this week alone, we had two presentations, two lectures. One in which Deanna J. Fox, I don't know whether you know her or not. She's professor at Bridgewater University. She has also worked on Maroon communities, and she came and she was talking about how these women they wove seeds in their hair, which they brought from Africa, and then they planted those seeds, and that's how they were able to maintain connection with their African past. And then we had another lecture by Professor Chandra Talpade Mohanty, where Professor Mohanty spoke about neoliberal, epistemic violence, and how neoliberal has usurped, the terms of discourse. Because when we talk about policy, food policy, it's all so steeped in, neoliberal discourse, which is different from the traditional knowledges that women preserve. And as you rightly pointed out, the solution to food insecurity does not lie outside, in the policy framers and the policy makers and their understanding of food and food security, but it lies, within women, within these communities. So basically what you are proposing is a decolonial approach, the ultimate, the urgency to recognize these knowledges as also equally valid, knowledges that have been delegitimized by years of colonial rule and neo-colonial, imperial dominance. So thank you so much for pointing out these things. I will pass on to Amina to take up questions from the chat box, which I am sure there must be many. So over to you, Amina.
All right. Okay. So yes, we do have questions coming in, and I will read the question one by one, and I think then you can reflect on it. So the first question is, it says that it's, of course, very crucial and relevant arguments, the ones that you presented today, Dr. Paola. And however, I would like to know what is the level of commercialization of agriculture impacting women agriculturists and exclusion faced by them on the alibi of patenting of crops and seeds by state.
So I should reply now?
Yes, I think
okay.
One question.
Yes. This is a very, thank you very much for your question. It's a very complex question to reply. And well, let me just first think, how can I reply it? So I will reply to this question with regard to Colombia, which is the country that in this specific regard I command better. So in the case of Colombia, this is a complex question to reply, because this is related, of course, with the kind of internal conflict that we unfortunately live, and that is not excluded from all that I have been presenting today. So it's important to understand that, of course, one of the main political issues in Colombia relates to the land and relates to production, due to the fact that the country has been pushed, I might say, to these networks of cocaine and coke distribution that obviously it's not something that we as Colombians literally command or have the possibility to solve, because this is a transnational conflict and issue. So why I'm naming these? Because this has to be with the seeds policies in Colombia. So the policies on seeds in Colombia are very and extremely delicate. And in this kind of context, the politicians, of course, privilege to favor all that is legal, all that is purchased, all that is patented. So just to put an example, in a few years ago, some peasants, they cultivate their own rice that they have held for perhaps centuries, and that they have repeatedly produced. When the government discovered that they were not purchasing the seeds, what they did is went with the police and burned all the production. So all the peasants were not only without food, this was rice, so they were not only without food, but they were also without an income for several months, because we are speaking about tons of seeds that were burned. This is to say that the research that I'm doing is urgent, because if you recognize the value of these, the stewardship of seeds, and how there is knowledge behind all these processes that peasants and women, indigenous populations have kept, that would lead to new policy frames. amidst a situation that is very complex in the case of Colombia. The pressure that we feel from the United States, it's one of the hardest, I feel, on earth to, because precisely of the cocaine dealing, that the government must control what is cultivated in the land. So the struggle is not going to be easy, but if we foreground all this knowledge and we put it up front as the forefront of knowledge production, because that's what it is, as I have shown, this is deep wisdom. We are not speaking of something improvised. We're speaking of something that comes not only from the period in which they arrived several centuries ago, but a knowledge of cultivation that comes from millennia, and that it's much more deeper than any seeds, patented seeds that have been created in a lab. So it's important that we recognize that a peasant shouldn't be necessarily put into the pressure of buying new seeds, but to reusing the seeds. The country is walking into that direction. We have now a leftist government that is looking into favoring more the peasant population. But by now, this is what I can reply to this question. I don't know if it's okay. You, Amina, Nisha, please. Can you tell me if it's okay?
Thank you so much. I think we should move on to the next question.
Please, yes, that was a difficult one.
So this one is, okay, so yeah, if the capitalist government followed this and brought this policy, we wouldn't be having this lecture, but your presentation was excellent. So this is more of a comment. I'll move on to the question. So in India too, we have similar seed banks by women with their traditional knowledge system, especially in Northeast. This is a comment by Professor Vijayalakshmi Brara, who's a professor at our center, Sarojini Naidu Centre. And we have a query. So apart from intergenerational knowledge, what are the other resilient models adopted by women for food security, especially at the time of privatization and globalization? This is a question by Dr. Suraya Tabassum, who's also a faculty at our center.
Thank you so much. Okay, so they have several. This is, I mean, what is the particularity of this intergenerational knowledge is precisely the resilience and not only the features of the practices. So, for instance, they have managed to, say, generate new varieties of these croppings. They have established experimentation whenever there is climate change or overflow. So they need to change instantly the dynamics according to what the context that they're living impose them into them. You say privatization and globalization, but I would add also something that it's uncontrollable, that it's the climate change. And all these three, if we combine the three of them, what we can see in both regions is a massive displacement. In the Gambia, all displacement is happening because they are not able to produce food anymore in the areas in which they traditionally lived. So they have moved to the cities. And in the cities, it's interesting that they are in both sides of the Atlantic. They are, for instance, putting cooperatives. And these cooperatives serve food, they sell food, they create restaurants, and many of these restaurants are led directly by women. And it's super interesting, your question, also because as they have many of their people in areas where they can fish or produce other food, or the seasoning that they cannot, the specific seasoning that regards to that environment that cannot be produced in the city. So they have created some networks to send this fish and to send these herbs to this cooperative of restaurants, so they can offer like a very unique tastes that you cannot have in those cities otherwise if they do the networking with them. And this also, of course, sent like kind of money to these areas that are very impoverished, and they also earn some money. So they have become big entrepreneurs. And in the case of Medellin, Bogota, and the capitals of Colombia, all this displaced population, many of them are now a very dynamic traders of food, and also these restaurants are really very full because the food is amazing. So they have managed to counter all these policies, many of them in a very efficient way. Thank you for the question.
Right. I think we have come to an end, but maybe I can just have one last question, and this is from my side. So I was just curious. So in many colonial archives, the African knowledge is, either erased or it is mediated by through colonial voices. So, what sort of methodological strategies do you use if you want to when you reconstruct those silence epistemology, and especially with the reference to the feminist political ecological framework?
Thank you so much, Professor Amina. Well, what I use is, because this has several layers, because this started by being a historical research. So in terms of the historical research as such, it is really very important that we read what is called against the grain, so that we don't read all these. Of course, we should understand that all these written materials of the Latin American colonial period were written by the slaveholders, but the slave traders. So the voices are, as you said, completely omitted from that. And not only that, when we read the persecutions of these that they did against these communities to recapture them, to brought them to enslavement, again, they were unsuccessful. What you see is a criminalization of their seek for freedom, of their any kind of initiatives that allow any kind of autonomy from the part of the enslaved population. So methodologically, you need to be aware of transmuting, and contradicting the argument there by understanding that this looking for autonomy, looking for freedom is, of course, a legitimate right of any human being and at any point of history. So you need to be aware of having a very critical reading of the documentation. This, I would say, is the first point. But in the terms of the ethnographic work, I think that it is extremely important to consider what would benefit the women and this organization as such. So the work should not be carried onto these populations, and but with these populations. So it's an integration. It should be a dialogue. It should be a co-production in which I have been sharing, for instance, with them all these findings, the historical findings. They are fascinated about that gives them a lot of strength on all these struggles that they still need to live, as the evictions and etc., and all this police violence that is lived in Latin American cities against Black populations. So it's a matter of also this dialogue is also, I would say it directly what I think. It should be rooted in compassion towards the other human beings, so we can really construct something that is of benefit to all. Because I feel that this research is not only of benefit to a certain population, but as humanity, as a kind, because we could all take advantage of these knowledges to have better nutrition, to have better food policies, and working with them would allow these voices to get into the main stage of governance, which is what mainly this research is looking to. So thank you also for your question. May I also say a comment on Professor Nishad's intervention at the start?
Quick.
Yeah. So just to say that, yeah, it's important to this research on their bringing into their hairs the rice. It's very important. I don't think that there's still any documentation that shows up these. But in structural terms, it's also relevant to understand that as these crops were important for the provision of the vessels, structurally, they were brought by these slave trader elites, as for instance, the Jesuits. The Jesuits participated in the transformation of food systems by bringing crops from India to Africa, from India to Latin America, from Latin America to Africa. So that is a very complex dynamic. But what is more important is to understand where is the leadership. For me, the leadership, it is much more than in the fact that they brought the seeds. The most important fact is how they adapted, incorporated, reconfigured this knowledge in the Americas, showing how it's a unique possibility of seeing how food heritage works, especially as we know that food is something so related to women throughout history because of historical conditions, not necessarily natural conditions. But that could bring us some answers on this regard.
Thank you. I think we've come to the end of today's lecture, and we don't have time for any more questions. Yes, indeed, it was an excellent lecture. Thank you so much. And I'm here to now propose an official vote of thanks. So on behalf of Sarojini Naidu Centre, of course, it is, as always, my privilege to extend a heartfelt vote of thanks to, at the conclusion of this enriching lecture. We are, of course, ever so grateful to Dr. Paola Vargas Arana for the talk today. And of course, your lecture, it offered us a very powerful insight, a historical perspective on the intersection of gender and ecology and the colonial extraction, which you so vividly and graphically, presented through your presentation. You brought into focus the lives, the labor, and the resistance of the enslaved African women within this colonial, mining companies, and invited us to actually rethink the environmental histories, through the lenses of the race, gender, and power. So thank you so much. You also help us understand, which I really found interesting, was the feminist political ecology, which is something which I'm intrigued to look further into. Thank you so much. I would also like to sincerely thank our Vice Chancellor, Professor Mazhar Asif, and of course, our Registrar Sir, for all the support, academic support, to continue these academic pursuits, these events, these talks and lectures. And also my heartfelt gratitude to our Director, Professor Nishad Zaidi, who's been a guiding force in leading the center in these events and making it, a catalyst. The center has almost become a catalyst in terms of the research, in gender-related, issues. So thank you so much for joining, all the students, the staff, the supporting, our volunteers. Weber, thank you so much for all the technical support. And we'll hope to see you again soon on 16th with our special distinguished lecture with Professor Sylvia Vatuk. So hope to see you on 16th. Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're muted in chat.
Ma'am, you're muted. You're still muted.
You're muted.
Yeah, something is happening. My screen is gone. Is it like that?
No, it's normal.
Screen
Is
is
it
fine.
not? Okay, I see it differently. But thank you so much, Paola. It was fascinating. And maybe someone can click a screenshot for all the. Someone is doing it, Amina?
I'm also doing it, and I have students to. Yes, yes, we have
Okay. Oh,
a couple of screenshots.
excellent, excellent. Thank you so much, Paola.
Thank you so much, Professor Nishat. Thank you so much, and Professor Amina. It's great to be here. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.